Christmas morning came with its usual quiet. Snow layered the porch steps like sifted flour, untouched, but for the single set of FedEx tracks leading to my front door. I opened it slowly, more out of habit than hope, and found a small basket slouched against the siding. Cellophane wrinkled apples bruised a sprig of evergreen curled brown at the edges. No ribbon, no handwritten note, just a sticker printed in block letters. Happy holidays from your loved ones. Bulk order, Dr. 8439. I brought it inside and placed it on the kitchen counter. The cellophane gave off a faint, plasticky sweetness, the kind that clings to gift baskets from gas stations and corporate offices. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and reached for my tin of Earl Grey. The sound of water heating was the only thing alive in the house. No music, no voices, no scent of cinnamon or pine, just the low hum of a refrigerator and the sharp echo of nothing at all. The kettle shrieked. I poured the water, let the leaves steep, and carried my mug to the front window. The air outside shimmered with cold. The street was still. My neighbor's porch light blinked once, then went out. My phone buzzed on the windowsill. Chase alert. You've just made a purchase. $4.200 bike trawlers. Silver. Pines Ski Resort. I read it once, then again. The number stared back at me like it knew me personally. I hadn't used that card in months. It lived in the drawer under my budgeting ledger, safe untouched. I didn't panic. I just set down my mug and walked to the drawer, opened it, and there it was, still in place, right where I left it. My daughter Blair had asked for the pin a few years back. Just in case I need to pick something up for you, she said, and I had handed it over without thought. That same Christmas, she laughed and said, "You're so lucky you have no real expenses anymore." I remember smiling, pretending not to hear what she really meant. Now I stared at that card, my name fading slightly at the edges, the plastic warm from the heat of my palm. I walked back to the kitchen, sat at the table across from the basket, and watched the snow fall past the window, silent and steady. The tea had already gone cold. The cabinet groaned when I pulled it open, its old metal runners sticking like they were reluctant to reveal what they'd been holding all these years. Inside were files I hadn't touched in months, maybe years, but I always knew they were there. Labeled neatly, Housing Support Education, Medical MISC. I slid out the first folder. Inside Blair's old rent deposit from when she just needed a little boost after Kyle lost his job. A transfer receipt marked $800, urgent, rent, due today. Below it, Marin's book, fee, Mom, it's only $75. I'll Venmo you back, though she never did. Kyle's email about the bridge loan before their refinance. It'll be less than a week, I swear. We just need the down payment to show clean. I turned each page like it might cut me, and some did. The tone of their requests, always warm, always casual, echoed in my head, louder than the paper rustling in my hands. They'd ask, like I was a convenience, not a person. And I said yes, like I didn't know how to say no. The pile grew. Co-payments for therapy. Blair never mentioned. Dental visits. Marin never thanked me for. The bank transfers had no apology, no follow-up, just a kind of assumed access, like they believed my account existed for their overflow. I'd kept all of it, not to hold it against them, not to shame or demand or guilt. I kept it because if I didn't, the entire story of what I'd given would vanish. Their memories had a habit of skipping over the uncomfortable parts. Mine did not. I pulled out a legal pad and a pen, sat down at the dining table, and began to add the numbers. It took longer than I expected. I double-checked the math, triple-checked the totals. When I finally drew a line beneath the last figure, The sum sat at the bottom like a verdict. $81. $92. I didn't cry. I didn't sigh. I just stared at the number solid and cold. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd funneled into quiet wires and paper trails, and still no one had ever asked if I had enough. I typed the message with steady fingers. Did you use my card for Silver Pines? It took only a minute for the reply to come through. Hope the basket arrived. We'll sort the charges. Love you. And your 2. Exclamation points, like I was being silly for even asking. No explanation, no apology, just that strange mix of cheer and dismissal that Blair had perfected over the years. I stared at the screen, rereading her words the way Will made it sound like I was part of the decision, like I'd been there sipping cocoa in the lodge beside them instead of sitting alone with a shriveled fruit basket and a cup of cold tea. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I scrolled to the Chase app, clicked into settings, and opened the section labeled Authorized Users. There they were lined up like guests who'd overstayed Blair Holt, Kyle Holt, Marin Holt. Each name a quiet entitlement, each name one I had added myself once upon a time when I believed that access was love. I clicked remove on the first. A confirmation screen popped up. I tapped yes, then again, and again. Each removal was met with silence. No bells, no buzz, just absence. Their access vanished with less noise than a sigh. When the screen showed only my name, I placed the phone face down on the table. The room felt quieter, not just empty, but clean, like something had been swept out after years of dust, gathering in corners I hadn't dared to look at. I stood up and walked to the drawer where I kept the yellow pages, the printed kind. I hadn't used it in years, but the number was still there, circled in blue pen, Marla Penn Realtor. Discreet, local, independent. I dialed. Her voice answered on the second ring, warm and curious. I said only this: I need to sell a property. It's in my name, and it's time. There was a pause on the other end. Then Marla said, I'll be by tomorrow morning. I hung up, folded the legal pad closed, and turned off the kitchen light. Marla arrived just after 9, her boots already dusted with snow, and clipboard in hand. She didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. We walked through the house slowly, hers noting square footage, mine tracing the memories still clinging to the corners. When we got to the front room, she turned to me gently. Do they know you're selling? I shook my head. They didn't ask before using my card. Why should I ask now? She didn't press, just made a note and moved to the kitchen. That house wasn't theirs, not by law, not by deed. I bought it 15 years ago when Kyle's startup failed and they needed a place just for a few months. I was still working, then, still hopeful, still naive. They moved in with boxes, a toddler, and promises. The months became years. Repairs were always too tight that month. I paid the taxes because it was easier than arguing. I mowed the lawn until my knees began to ache. They painted the walls, but never asked if the house was theirs. I think they just assumed. I never signed it over. Never even drafted a transfer. In my mind, it was still mine because I'd never been asked to let it go, only expected to. Marla finished her notes and said she'd return the next day with a photographer and the preliminary listing documents. I nodded. There was no ceremony to the moment, no drama, just a quiet step in a direction that had waited too long to be taken. When she left, I opened the old filing box where I kept my important documents. The deed was there, slightly curled, a thin envelope wrapped in a rubber band, my name printed cleanly on the top. It hadn't moved in 15 years. Not even a fingerprint disturbed the seal. I placed it on the table next to the legal pad, the one where I'd written the tally. I added a note in the margin house value, not emotional. I tucked the deed into a manila folder and slid it into my bag. I started packing 2 days after Marla's visit. Not because I had a deadline, but because the air inside the house felt thinner, like it had exhaled and didn't plan to breathe in again. I didn't rush. I folded what I needed, just a few warm sweaters, 3 pairs of slacks, my walking shoes. I wrapped the blue porcelain cup Walter gave me for our 30th anniversary in a scarf and placed it near the bottom of the suitcase. Then I pulled the old tin box from the top shelf of the linen closet. It was dented in one corner and still had the label I'd written with a black marker years ago, wills and won'ts. Inside were things no one else had ever touched my will. Walter's old Social Security stub, a letter he once wrote me during a week-long silence in 1989, and a photo of us standing at Flathead Lake before time got heavy. I closed the lid gently and slid the box into my bag. The cabin I'd found was 3 towns over. Tucked between a ridge and a frozen stream, it was small, but it had good bones and a stove that worked. The landlord had asked no questions, just accepted the deposit and handed over the keys with a nod. I told him I'd be paying in full for 6 months. No, I wouldn't need mail delivery. Before leaving the house, I walked through each room once. I didn't take photos. I didn't write a note. I left no forwarding address. Not even Marla knew where I was going. The house hit the market 2 days later. She texted to confirm the listing was live and that a few interested buyers had already reached out. I replied with a simple thank you and nothing more. Back in the cabin, I lit a small fire and watched the light flicker against the pine walls. My phone stayed silent, and so did I. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. Not a call, not permission, not even an apology. They came back from Aspen on a Thursday. I knew because Marla sent me a single-line email that afternoon. There was some commotion at the property today. That was all she wrote and all I needed. I could picture it, Blair, stepping out of the SUV, sunglasses still on, dragging her matching luggage up the walkway, only to stop dead in her tracks at the for sale sign staked clean into the lawn. I imagined the way her mouth would tighten, the exact pitch of her voice when she realized the lockbox on the front door wasn't a mistake. Marla told me later Blair had left a shrill, breathless voicemail, something between outrage and disbelief. Kyle called the old landline, but I disconnected it weeks ago. He tried my cell too, though I'd already blocked their numbers. He left a message anyway. We need to talk. You can't do this. But I could. And I had. From the beginning, they assumed the house was theirs because I never reminded them it wasn't. I never charged rent. I never corrected Blair when she told people, oh, it's technically in my mom's name, but it's basically ours. The truth is, they stopped asking what was mine a long time ago. Somewhere between the borrowed credit cards, the emergency Venmos, the family dinners I wasn't invited to, but still helped fund, they'd made a silent decision. I was the fallback, the net, the background convenience. Now the net was gone. I didn't listen to Kyle's message. Just deleted it and set the phone back on the counter. Outside, the snow had stopped. Thin rays of light spilled through the trees and landed across the small table where I'd unpacked a book and a tin of Earl Grey. I poured myself a cup and watched the steam rise in slow curls. Marla followed up the next morning, 2 more viewings scheduled. She asked if I wanted to approve any sale conditions. I told her to list it as is, no repairs, no apologies. The letter came by certified mail, the envelope thick and aggressively crisp. The return address read Grayson and Dunn LLP, some firm I'd never heard of, but the tone was instantly familiar. Inside was a typed letter on heavy paper full of formal phrases and self-righteous formatting, wrongful eviction abuse of power, emotional duress. Blair had found herself a lawyer. I read every word, slowly sipping tea between paragraphs. It was written with the assumption that I had committed a personal betrayal rather than a legal act, that by withdrawing something I had never legally or emotionally promised, I had somehow crossed a line. The entire thing read like a tantrum in professional grammar. I didn't respond with a lawyer of my own. I didn't need to. Instead, I gathered 3 documents, the original deed in my name, a printout of 15 years of paid property taxes, all bearing my signature, and a folder of itemized transfers, payments, and receipts totaling every dollar I had poured into their comfort. I placed them in a new envelope, neatly organized, and added a single handwritten note on top. No agreement was broken. Just your assumption. I didn't expect gratitude. I didn't expect acknowledgement. I mailed it back the next morning at the post office in the next town over where no one knew my name. A week passed without word. Then one evening, as I shelved a book, I just finished reading, a notification pinged on my phone. A calendar invite from Blair. Family meeting. Saturday, 3 p.m. Rachel's house. No message, no explanation. Just an event dropped into my life like a summons, as if nothing had happened, as if I were still part of the old rhythm they thought they controlled. I didn't respond, but I wrote down the time in my notebook, closed the cover gently, and tucked it beside the wood stove. The mornings here begin without noise, no calendar reminders, no requests disguised as questions, just the wind moving through the trees like something alive and unhurried. I wake before the sun reaches the edge of the pines, put on my slippers, and brew a cup of Earl Grey in the porcelain mug with the faded hourglass design. The steam feels like an old friend, present, unobtrusive, never asking for more than I'm willing to give. I planted the lavender out front 2 weeks ago. The ground was hard at first, resistant, the way anything unused for too long tends to be. But the roots are holding now, taking to the soil, as if they knew this place was waiting for them. I water them slowly each morning, not because they need it, but because I like the ritual. It reminds me I'm building something, even if no one else sees it. Yesterday, I ran into a man named Elwood James at the general store. Tall glasses, too large for his face. A wool hat he never quite managed to straighten. He asked if I was the woman who moved into the Croft cabin, and when I nodded, he grinned. Said they could use another warm brain at the library's Tuesday night discussion circle. Mostly retirees, he added, but a few of us still argue like teenagers. I told him I'd think about it, and he smiled like he already knew I'd come. Later that evening, I opened a book of old poems Walter once gave me. The corners were yellowed, but the words still held shape. I read them slowly aloud this time, letting them sit in the air and settle into the quiet. For once, no one was waiting for me to finish, so they could ask me for something. The calendar invite from Blair still sat unopened. I hadn't deleted it. Not out of hesitation, but because it didn't carry the urgency she thought it did. I turned another page, sipped my tea, and watched the steam curl above the rim of the mug as the light outside began to soften. It had been nearly 3 months since the fruit basket. The snow had thinned, and the lavender was beginning to wake beneath the soil. The days stretched quietly, books, tea, small walks through the woods. I had started writing again, just small things, thoughts mostly in the red notebook Walter once used for grocery lists. Then came the knock. It was soft, almost uncertain. I opened the door to find Evan standing there, hands buried in his jacket pockets, a folded piece of paper sticking out between his fingers. He looked thinner than I remembered. His eyes, always restless, seemed quieter now. He held out the paper without meeting my gaze. First repayment, he said. It was a check for $500. The amount didn't matter. It wasn't the number that surprised me. It was the lack of explanation. He didn't stumble through excuses, didn't try to dress it up as a gift or a favor, just the gesture, offered plainly. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at the table, the one I'd moved near the window so I could watch the light shift across the trees. I poured 2 cups of Earl Grey. He didn't ask for sugar, didn't reach for his phone. We drank in silence, the only sound, the occasional creak of the stove settling into its own rhythm. He glanced around, once eyes resting on the bookshelf, then the half-finished puzzle by the hearth. Finally, he looked at the photo of Walter and me on the mantel. He nodded slightly, like he'd expected to see it there. "I didn't think you'd want to see me again," he said, his voice barely above a breath. I didn't answer right away. There wasn't anything that needed to be said. The quiet between us felt full, not empty, not tense, just real. When the tea was gone, he slipped his hands back into his coat pockets and looked to me not with expectation, but with recognition. I walked him to the door and opened it without speaking. He paused, then stepped out into the early light. That evening, after Evan left, I sat at the small table by the window and opened my journal to its final page. The spine had begun to soften, the red cover curling slightly at the corners. I ran my fingers over the paper, then uncapped my pen. They never noticed when I disappeared, but I noticed when I returned to myself. I paused, letting the words sit unembellished and enough. The phone rang once, then again. Rachel, Lily. I watched their names flash across the screen, then fade. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Whatever they thought this was some beginning of negotiation, a thawing of silence, I knew better. Not because I was angry, because I had changed. I closed the journal and placed it beneath the folder marked "Only Mine." Inside were the things no one had asked about: my handwritten will, the deed to the cabin receipts from lavender seed orders, even a few lesson plans for the community class I'd agreed to teach starting next spring. Things chosen by me, for me with no one else's signature in the margins. The wind picked up outside. I slipped on my sweater and stepped onto the porch. The air carried the kind of chill that clears the lungs without hurting. The sky above was a flat sheet of gray stars just beginning to break through like stitches in fabric. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. I stood there for a long time, hands wrapped around the tea I hadn't touched since Evan left. It was still warm, holding its heat better than I expected. Inside the cabin was quiet, not silent in the way the old house had been empty and waiting, but quiet like something at rest. The kind of quiet you grow into, the kind you don't apologize for. The phone lit up again, but I didn't turn to look. I took a slow sip, letting the steam rise into the night air, and whispered something only the trees could hear. Sometimes disappearing isn't running away, it's finally going home.